Martin Scorsese's classic gangster flick Goodfellas turns 30 this year, and while its impressive cast is rightfully applauded for its work on the true crime tale, the Goodfellas characters don't match up to reality in every way. As with any Hollywood adaptation, plot structure and character arcs require a bit of alteration from reality. The critically acclaimed Goodfellas, despite its commitment to the true story, is no exception. Goodfellas is the story of Henry Hill, Ray Liotta, who gets involved in the New York City Mafia at a young age and works his way up the ranks until turning state's witness in 1980. Famous for its creative camerawork and anti-heroic protagonists, Goodfellas takes viewers deep into the New York Mafia underworld during the 1970s. From Taxi Driver to The Irishman, Martin Scorsese is known for films about violence and crime, and the director has a fascination with stories about men who seize, and ultimately lose, power. The true story behind Goodfellas is a complicated tale of mafia scheming and brutal murders, and the film mostly sticks to the facts. For example, the heist of cash and jewelry from Germany's Lufthansa airline at JFK International Airport is a real event. The Goodfellas characters are based on real individuals, although the filmmakers changed many of their names and other aspects of their lives. Here's the Goodfellas real-life story for every character. Henry Hill, Ray Liotta. Audiences follow one of the main Goodfellas characters, Henry Hill, from an eager teen who always wanted to be a gangster to his career as a Lucchese family associate, and much of the film lines up with Hill's actual life. Hill started his career carrying cash from debtors to Paul Vario, a Lucchese capo, a mafia captain. By the time he was arrested for drugs charges in 1980, Hill helped plan multiple heists and was involved in murder cover-ups. As the film progresses, Hill's addiction to cocaine makes him a more paranoid, volatile character. Hill ran his own side business as a drug trafficker, and evidence shows that he was likely dependent on cocaine and methamphetamines until his death in 2012. Aside from the Lufthansa heist, Hill was also involved in college basketball rigging. In many ways, though, Hill was more of a contact point for the Lucchese family. He found ways for them to get involved with schemes that were already in motion or aided with the criminal acts of his friends. While Goodfellas ends with Hill entering witness protection, his real story goes on. Hill and his family were removed from the program after Hill was arrested for ongoing drug-related crimes. His wife filed for divorce from Hill in 1990, and he was arrested several more times throughout the remainder of his life and suffered from alcohol abuse in his later years. Before his death of heart disease in 2012, Hill put himself back into the spotlight, appearing on radio and television shows to talk about his time in the mafia. Despite this, his former associates never made any attempts on his life. Most of the differences between Hill and Ray Liotta are physical. Goodfellas Hill is a more stereotypical Scorsese gangster, hair slicked back and eyes piercing with handsomeness and danger. Mugshots of the real Hill show him with bushy, unkempt hair and wrinkled clothes. Hill wasn't the fine-tuned criminal shown in Goodfellas. Additionally, Goodfellas depicts Hill as having two daughters, but he actually had a daughter and a son who was never interested in his father's business and excelled in school as a form of rebellion. Jimmy Conway, Robert De Niro. Jimmy Conway, played by Robert De Niro, was actually Jimmy Burke, another associate of the Lucchese family. Like Hill, Burke had Irish heritage and could therefore never be a made man in the Italian mafia. However, he was the mastermind behind many of the family's biggest heists. Burke was raised in a variety of abusive foster homes before finding the Lucchese family. He began mafia work as a hijacker. His proclivity for tipping the drivers whose trucks he stole gave him his nickname, Jimmy, the Gent. He did mentor both Hill and Tommy DeSimone, Tommy DeVito in Goodfellas, and De Niro's portrayal seems to be relatively authentic. According to Hill, Burke was quiet and calm until his temper flared. If he felt slighted in any way, he wasn't beyond revenge, including murder. Before he was married, some believe Burke murdered and dismembered his fiancée's ex-boyfriend. As in Goodfellas, Burke also took part in the murder of William "Billy Bats" Bentvena. According to Hill, many of Burke's enemies are buried on the property of Burke's club, where the attack against Bentvena began. Burke later went on to mastermind the Lufthansa heist depicted in the film. In reality, his son, Frank, was a driver in the heist, and afterwards, Burke ordered or was involved in the murders of around 9 of his accomplices. While De Niro's slick, clean-shaven look may be accurate to Burke's appearance, Burke's arrest photos show a physically very different, balder man to the gangster Goodfellas portrayed. Burke was eventually arrested for college basketball points fixing after Hill testified to federal officials. While in prison, Hill further implicated Burke in the murder of a drug dealer. This increased Burke's sentence by 20 years, and he died behind bars. Tommy DeVito, Joe Pesci. Joe Pesci's performance as Tommy DeVito earned him an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor, but there are some remarkable differences between Pesci and Thomas DeSimone, on whom DeVito is based. There's no doubt that DeSimone was every bit as volatile as Pesci's DeVito. His grandfather and uncle were both bosses of the Los Angeles Mafia, but DeSimone chose a path outside the family. Born in 1950, he was younger than either Burke or Hill, under whom he worked as he rose through the Lucchese family ranks. Known for carrying a gun around in a brown sandwich bag, Hill suggests that the real DeSimone was more ruthless than his Goodfellas portrayal. According to Hill, one of DeSimone's first murders was of a random pedestrian who happened to be walking by, and DeVito's murder of young waiter, Spider, is one of the film's cruelest moments. It's allegedly completely true. Also in the film is DeSimone's murder of Billy Bats Bentvena. As depicted, the body was stored in Hill's car, which Hill, Burke, and DeSimone drove to DeSimone's mother's house to get shovels and lime. He also grabbed a kitchen knife, which he used to finish the murder. DeSimone was much larger than Pesci, with descriptions putting him at over 6 feet tall and 220 pounds. He was also quite a bit younger. Pesci was 47 when the 90s audiences sat down in theaters for Goodfellas' classic cold open for the first time, but DeSimone went missing at age 28. Pictures also show that DeSimone was less clean-shaven, a trend among characters in Scorsese's adaptation. What Pesci captured was DeSimone's terrifying spirit. He's impossible to predict, and his eyes are always scheming. His death, when he believes he will be made only to be killed for the murder of Bats, seems to be based mostly in fact. According to Hill, infamous mob boss John Gotti was directly involved in the real hit. Paul Cicero, Paul Sorvino. Paul Sorvino's character, Paul Cicero, is based on Lucchese capo Paul Vario. Vario oversaw a piece of Lucchese territory in Brooklyn. A typical mafia captain, Vario stayed away from the crimes in which his soldiers and associates were involved. Instead, he oversaw much of the illegal gambling and extortion aspects of the business. He also signed off on bigger heists, such as the Lufthansa heist, and on hits such as that of Di Simone. Sorvino plays Cicero as a more classical mobster, one who always stayed one step away from his soldiers' crimes. In reality, Vario was known for his temper. He once commanded his soldiers to beat a waiter for spilling wine on his wife's dress. Although he was, like Sorvino, a larger man, Vario was also incredibly tall, and New York City police saw him as one of the most dangerous criminals in the city. Due to Hill's testimony, Vario was convicted of defrauding the government and racketeering. He died in prison while serving his term. Morris Kessler, Chuck Lowe. Morris Kessler is an interpretation of Martin Krugman. Krugman was first-generation Russian Jewish, and he got his start in illegal bookkeeping. Rather than work directly for the mob, Krugman ran his own operation. Through this work, the real-life Krugman became familiar with several employees of JFK Airport. Because of this connection, he was able to tell Hill about Lufthansa's JFK vault. After the heist, Krugman became adamant that he receive a large piece of the money. That, combined with the fact that Burke didn't like him personally, marked Krugman for death. In Goodfellas, Kessler is killed with an ice pick. The real Krugman officially went missing, but Hill has since claimed that he was murdered, dismembered, and buried on property of Burke's club. As portrayed by Chuck Lowe, Kessler is a large, brazen man who likes to play along with mobsters, but Krugman was a small man who wore large glasses to cover up the bulging eyes that resulted from his hyperthyroidism. Billy Batts, Frank Vincent. The brutal murder of Billy Batts in Goodfellas is shocking, and so is the crime on which it is based. After he was released from prison, Billy Batts Benventa found himself on the wrong side of Burke and Di Simone. As in the film, Benventa did insult Di Simone for having once been a shoe shiner, but Benventa was a made man in the Gambino crime family and wasn't killed for his words. When Benventa returned from a prison sentence, he wanted control of his loansharking business back from Burke. Burke, unwilling to turn it over, beat him, presumably to death, along with Di Simone. While Goodfellas may get the motivation wrong, the disposal of Benventa's body is scarily accurate. His body was thrown into Hill's car, and while Hill, Burke, and Di Simone were on their way to dispose of the body, they heard pounding noises from the trunk. They stopped at Di Simone's mother's house for a large kitchen knife, which Di Simone used to finally kill Benventa. The men buried his body near a dog kennel that belonged to one of Burke's friends, but it was exhumed weeks later as the land was being developed. Frank Vincent, who played Batts in the film, had curly gray hair dissimilar to Benventa's shorter, darker hair, and the real Batts wore a pair of large glasses that further set him apart. Why Goodfellas changed its gangsters from real-life film adaptations almost always take creative license with real life to tell a better story. The changes to Goodfellas characters from their real-life counterparts are no exception. The reasoning behind the alterations are twofold. The first was to better fit the story into one cohesive narrative. The specific exploits of each gangster could easily fill an entire movie, considering all that happened in their lives. Rather than have a full ensemble narrative, Scorsese focused instead on Henry Hill, revealing the mafia underground through the lens of his dealings and interactions. Telling the story of each Goodfella in its entirety would have created an oversaturation of subplots that detracted from the overarching narrative. For example, the murder of Billy Batts actually took place over a matter of weeks, rather than in a split moment after DeSimone became enraged. In addition, the Lufthansa heist also took much longer than was depicted in Goodfellas. Reportedly, the perpetrators had to stalk a security guard to find out his weaknesses, then were able to pull the keys from him after inviting a hooker to engage with him in the parking lot. This understandably took a while. Henry Hill's desire to be in the Mafia was also exaggerated, as he planned on leaving the organization a multitude of times before being sucked back in. The second reason why it was a good idea for Martin Scorsese to change the real-life events for the movie has to do with Henry Hill's testimony. Hill wasn't the most reliable of sources at times, changing his story more often than not. For example, he consistently danced around the murder of Billy Batts, switching his story more than once about how events actually transpired. Since Henry Hill's testimony can't be deemed reliably accurate, it was necessary for the legendary film director to create a quasi-fictional narrative that wound an intriguing tale instead of a true-to-life biopic. It's impossible for Scorsese to give a perfect blow-by-blow of everything that happened during Hill's time in the Mafia, and changing the Goodfellas characters and certain events was the right call. It gave Scorsese an opportunity to build his own unique retelling, while extrapolating information and displaying it in a stylish way. It is inevitable that a film adaptation of true-life events will have to change some of the facts. For Goodfellas, Martin Scorsese chose actors who could interpret the personalities of its subjects. From Pesci's Oscar-winning role as Tommy DeVito to Liotta's slow descent into drug-fueled madness, the performances are the highlight of the film. Each brings a different level of mania, callousness, and intimidation. Overall, Goodfellas is a mostly faithful adaptation, but this is relatively inconsequential to its overall cinematic legacy. By combining mafia legends, speculating on the fates of gangsters, and casting actors who didn't always look the part, Scorsese built a classic of gangster cinema that he would even self-reference in his 2019 film, The Irishman.